It was a bright Saturday morning when Mark walked out of his driveway and spotted a crisp white envelope tucked under the wiper of his old pickup truck. The truck, a rust-streaked 1998 Ford F-150, had been his pride for years. It wasn't much to look at, but it was reliable, powerful, and held memories of late-night fishing trips and endless weekend projects. Mark peeled open the letter, expecting maybe a flyer or neighborly note. Instead, it was an official warning from the Homeowners Association. The accusation: his truck was unsightly and detracted from neighborhood property values. If he didn't remove it from the street within 7 days, he'd face daily fines. Mark couldn't believe it. He had lived in the cul-de-sac for 10 years. The truck had been parked in the same spot for almost as long, and no one had ever complained. This wasn't about property values. It was about power. A new HOA president, a woman named Linda who had taken over last month, was known for enforcing every obscure rule in the book. Mark had heard rumors of her fining a neighbor for having a welcome mat that was the wrong color and harassing another for planting unapproved flowers. Now it was his turn. At first, Mark thought about quietly complying. He could park his truck farther down the street or in a friend's driveway. But the tone of the letter gnawed at him. It wasn't just a warning, it felt personal, dripping with condescension. Your non-compliance will not be tolerated. That single line replayed in his head all day. The more Mark thought about it, the angrier he got. He remembered the HOA meeting where Linda had been elected. She promised to restore order to the neighborhood, accusing residents of letting things slip. Most people hadn't cared enough to attend the vote. Mark now wished he had. The next few days were filled with whispers from neighbors. Some of them had gotten similar warnings for petty infractions. A mailbox that leaned slightly, trash cans that were out too long, a lawn ornament that wasn't aesthetically harmonious. People grumbled, but no one fought back. Linda liked to remind them of the HOA bylaws. By Friday, Mark decided he wasn't just going to move the truck. He was going to make a point. If Linda thought his truck was ugly, then she was about to see it a lot more often. Instead of hiding it, Mark cleaned it up just enough to make it functional but left every bit of rust showing. He polished the chrome bumper until it gleamed like a mirror and slapped on a bumper sticker that read, "Eyesore and proud." Saturday morning arrived, the deadline for him to move the truck. Neighbors watched from their driveways as Mark backed out of his spot, revved the engine and drove off. Linda must have thought she'd won. But she didn't know where he was taking it. Mark drove straight to the HOA Clubhouse, the pride of the community, where Linda's pristine BMW always sat in its reserved space. The parking lot was empty except for her car. Mark pulled his truck in front of the main entrance, right where everyone would see it when the weekly community yoga class started. He parked at an angle, taking up 2 spots, and locked it. Then he walked home. By afternoon, his phone started buzzing with texts from neighbors. Photos of his truck sitting in front of the clubhouse were circulating in the community group chat. Some people thought it was hilarious. Others worried Linda would explode. She did. By evening, Mark received another letter, this one threatening immediate fines and legal action if he didn't remove the truck. But Mark wasn't backing down this time. What started as a personal irritation was quickly turning into a neighborhood rebellion. People began sharing their own stories of Linda's harassment, and they were all tired of it. The truck was no longer just an old vehicle, it was a symbol. As Mark sat on his porch, sipping coffee and watching the sun dip behind the houses, he knew this fight wasn't just about him anymore. The truck had sparked something. And Linda wasn't going to let that slide. The real battle was just beginning. Sunday morning brought no peace to the neighborhood. Mark's truck still sat in front of the HOA clubhouse, and by the time Linda arrived to lead the weekly yoga class, a small group of neighbors had gathered nearby just to watch her reaction. She stormed out of her BMW, phone already in hand, snapping photos of the eyesore in front of the community's prized building. Within an hour, Mark received a certified letter taped to his front door. The HOA declared his vehicle a community nuisance and informed him that daily fines of $200 would begin immediately. They even threatened to tow it at his expense. To Linda, this wasn't about aesthetics anymore, it was about control. But the situation was shifting faster than she expected. When word spread about the fines, more neighbors stepped forward with their own stories of unfair treatment. A retired couple revealed they had been fined for improper holiday decorations. Another family showed photos of their backyard being inspected without permission. The resentment that had simmered under the surface for months was now boiling over. Mark decided to play this carefully. He wasn't going to lash out. Instead, he began gathering evidence. He read the HOA bylaws in full, highlighting sections Linda seemed to ignore. He noted that vehicles could only be considered unsightly if they were inoperable, leaking fluids, or abandoned. His truck ran perfectly and didn't leak a drop. By the HOA's own rules, Linda had no case. On Monday, Mark moved his truck slightly, not out of compliance, but to a new, equally visible spot. This time it was parked right beside the community playground, where parents dropped off their kids. He figured if Linda wanted to call his truck an eyesore, she could do it in front of families. Neighbors began honking in support as they drove by. Someone even left a note under his wiper that said, "Stand your ground, we're with you." Linda, however, was furious. She sent angry group emails accusing Mark of inciting rebellion and undermining neighborhood standards. By midweek, things escalated. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to discuss disciplinary action. Mark attended, sitting calmly in the front row while Linda ranted about how his truck was destroying the character of the neighborhood. But several residents spoke up in his defense, pointing out how absurd it was to go after a working vehicle while ignoring more pressing issues, like a broken streetlight and cracked sidewalks. Mark didn't say much at the meeting. He didn't have to. The more Linda talked, the more unhinged she sounded. When she threatened to tow the truck without further notice, murmurs of discontent spread through the room. One neighbor even suggested voting her off the board. Still, Linda wasn't backing down. The very next morning, Mark woke to find a bright orange sticker plastered across his windshield. "Vehicle in violation, subject to immediate removal." Instead of peeling it off, Mark left it there. He wanted everyone to see how far Linda was willing to go. That afternoon, he drove his stickered truck right past Linda's house, honking twice as he went by. Neighbors laughed, kids waved, and even a few board members smirked. The situation was no longer a simple dispute. It had become a public spectacle, and Linda was losing control of the narrative. But she had one more move planned, one that would push things past the point of no return. Late Thursday evening, as Mark sat on his porch, sipping coffee and reading over HOA regulations again, he noticed an unfamiliar tow truck slowly rolling through the neighborhood. It paused near the playground, then circled past his house. Linda wasn't bluffing. Thursday night bled into Friday morning under a cloud of tension. Mark barely slept, keeping one ear tuned for the sound of a diesel engine outside his window. Sure enough, just after dawn, he heard the grinding of gears and the low rumble of a tow truck idling on the street. Linda had made her move. Mark rushed outside to find the tow operator inspecting his truck, paperwork in hand. A few neighbors gathered, still in their pajamas, whispering nervously. Mark didn't shout or threaten. Instead, he calmly handed the driver a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, pointing out that his truck was neither abandoned nor inoperable, and that the HOA had no authority to remove it without a court order. The driver glanced at the papers, then at the crowd forming around them, and decided it wasn't worth the risk. With a shrug, he climbed back into his truck and drove off, leaving Linda fuming at her window 2 houses down. The failed tow attempt turned the neighborhood against her completely. What had started as one man's quiet protest had become a community-wide uprising. Residents who had stayed silent for months now openly confronted Linda at her morning walks. Someone even put up a hand-painted sign near the entrance that read, "This is our neighborhood, not your kingdom." Mark decided to take the fight to the next level. Over the weekend, he parked his ugly truck directly in front of the HOA Clubhouse again, this time with a giant poster taped to the side. Know your rights, read the bylaws. By Monday, nearly 24 neighbors had joined him, holding an impromptu meeting on the clubhouse steps. Stories poured out: unfair fines, intimidation, and endless harassment. Under mounting pressure, the HOA board convened again, this time without Linda controlling the agenda. When the vote came to remove her as president, it wasn't even close. Mark sat quietly in the back, arms crossed, as the motion passed and Linda stormed out, refusing to look at anyone. By the end of the week, the fines against Mark were rescinded. The HOA issued a written apology, promising to review its policies and prevent abuses of power in the future. Mark's truck remained exactly where it had always been, no longer a target of petty rules but now a neighborhood landmark, a reminder of what happens when people stand their ground. As for Linda, she sold her house and moved out within 2 months. Her reign of control was over, toppled not by lawyers or threats, but by a rusty old pickup truck and a community unwilling to be pushed around any longer. Mark didn't set out to be a hero. He just wanted to park his truck in peace. But sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone else too. End of story.